stood by the window and watched the snow fall over Seoul. The city lights made the snowflakes look like tiny stars falling from the sky. Behind her, she could hear her husband helping their daughter hang ornaments on the Christmas tree. Their son was sitting on the floor, trying to untangle a string of lights. "Mama, is this one okay?" Held up a paper star she had made. It was painted blue and silver with glitter that was already falling off onto the carpet. Turned and smiled. "It's beautiful, my love. Your grandparents will love it." But even as she said the words, felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She was not sure her parents would love anything about tonight. She was not even sure they understood the word love the way humans did. Was not born on Earth. Well, that was not exactly true. She was born on Earth in a small hospital 38 years ago, but she was taken from Earth when she was only 3 months old. They had come to her birth parents with an offer. They said they wanted to study human development. They said they would give her the best education in the galaxy. They said she would have opportunities no human child could dream of. Her birth parents had been poor. They had 2 other children and no money. They gave them enough credits to buy a house and start a business, and they gave away their baby daughter. Did not blame them. She had met them once 15 years ago when she first returned to Earth. They had cried and apologized. She had told them she understood, and she did understand, but understanding did not make the hole in her heart any smaller. The who raised her were named and was a commanding matriarch, one of the highest ranks in society, was a high scholar who studied genetics and evolution. They were powerful, they were respected, and they were as cold as the frozen moons of there. Had spent her childhood trying to please them. She studied harder than any other child in her learning pod. She won competitions in mathematics, in language, in physical combat. She pushed herself until her body ached and her mind felt like it would break. And every time she succeeded, her parents would nod and say, "Acceptable. You may continue." Never "well done," never "we are proud," never "we love you." When turned 25, she asked permission to visit Earth. Had frowned and asked why she would want to see such a primitive world, but had been curious. He thought it might be interesting to see how reacted to her birth species, so they let her go. Had expected to feel nothing. She had been raised to believe that emotions were weaknesses, that attachment was inefficient, that love was just a chemical reaction in primitive brains. But when she stepped off the transport ship and felt Earth's sun on her face, something inside her broke open. She cried for the first time in 20 years. She did not understand why, but she knew in that moment that she could never go back to the cold halls of the. She stayed on Earth. She met at a cultural festival in Seoul. He was kind and funny and warm. He laughed easily and cried at sad movies. He told her she was beautiful even when she felt broken. He taught her that love was not something you earned. It was something you gave freely without expecting anything in return. They got married 3 years later, was born 2 years after that, and came 3 years after. For 13 years had kept her Earth family and her family separate, and had visited twice, briefly, and both times they had looked at and the children like scientists examining insects. They had never stayed for dinner. They had never held there. They had never said the children's names. But this year had decided to try one more time. She had sent message after message to her adoptive parents, begging them to come for Christmas. She had explained the holiday, how it was about family, about being together, about giving gifts to show love. She had promised to prepare acceptable food. She had promised the visit would be short. Finally had agreed. She said she and would arrive on December 24th at exactly 1800 Earth time. They would stay for dinner. They would observe this human ritual, and then they would leave. It was not much, but it was something. "The tree looks wonderful," said, stepping back to admire their work. The tree was covered in lights and ornaments. Some were store-bought, but most were handmade by and over the years. Paper snowflakes, clay figures, painted. It was messy and imperfect and absolutely beautiful. "Do you think grandmother will like my star?" asked. She was 8 years old now, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's wide smile. She had been excited about meeting her grandparents for weeks. Knelt down and hugged her daughter. "I think she will treasure it." Ran over and pushed himself into the hug. He was 5, small for his age, with messy hair that never stayed flat. "I made grandfather a picture. It's our family. See? That's you and Papa and me and the cat." "We don't have a cat," pointed out. "I know, but I want one, so I put one in the picture." Laughed and kissed the top of his head. "It's perfect." At exactly 1800, the air in the living room began to shimmer. Grabbed her mother's hand. Hid behind's legs. Even after all these years, the shimmer transport was unsettling to watch. The shimmer grew brighter, and then 2 tall figures appeared in the middle of the room. And were beautiful in the way that glaciers were beautiful. Their skin was pale silver, almost translucent. Their eyes were large and dark, like pools of deep water. They stood over 2 meters tall, their long limbs folded elegantly at their sides. They wore robes made of a fabric that seemed to shift colors in the light. Looked around the apartment. Her gaze moved from the cramped kitchen to the cluttered shelves to the messy Christmas tree. Her expression did not change, but could read the disapproval in every line of her body. Said, her voice was like wind chimes made of ice. "This dwelling is smaller than I expected." "It's cozy," said, stepping forward with his hand extended. "Welcome to our home. It's an honor to finally meet you properly." Looked at his hand but did not take it. "We have met before." "Yes, but only briefly. I thought tonight we could really get to know each other." Was not listening to the conversation. He had pulled out a small device and was pointing it at end. A soft blue light scanned over their bodies. "What are you doing?" asked, her voice sharper than she intended. "Recording their biometric data," said calmly. "Genetic potential, neural development, physical markers, standard assessment. They're not subjects, they're your." Looked at her with those deep, unreadable eyes. "They are both." Felt's hand on her shoulder. She took a breath and tried to smile. It was going to be a long night. Dinner was ready. Had spent 3 days preparing everything. She had cooked traditional Korean dishes for her family, rice, bulgogi, kimchi, japchae. But she had also prepared nutrition blocks, carefully formulated to match the exact specifications her adoptive parents required. She had even arranged them on a special plate made of synthetic crystal, the kind the preferred. The family sat around the dining table. It was a tight fit. The apartment was not designed for 7-foot-tall alien guests, and sat stiffly in their chairs, their long legs folded awkwardly under the table, and sat across from them, stealing nervous glances at their grandparents. "Please eat," said, gesturing to the food. "I made your nutrition blocks myself. I still remember the formula you taught me." Picked up one of the blocks and examined it. She brought it to her nose and inhaled. Then she set it back down on the plate. "The mineral balance is incorrect," she said. "The iron content is 0.003% too high. It would cause digestive inefficiency." Felt her face grow warm. "I followed the formula exactly. Earth-sourced ingredients have unpredictable variations. This is why we rarely consume food prepared on primitive worlds." Cleared his throat. "Well, the bulgogi is delicious if I do say so myself. I helped with the marinade. Would you like to try some? It's made from beef, cow meat. Very popular here." Looked at the dish with something that might have been discussed. "We do not consume animal flesh. The practice is inefficient and ethically primitive." The table fell silent. Pushed a piece of meat around her plate. Was staring at his grandmother with wide eyes, his chopsticks forgotten in his hand. Tried again. "The children have been so excited to meet you. Is doing very well in school. She's at the top of her class in mathematics, and just learned to write his name. Show them." Shrank back in his chair. "I don't want to." "It's okay, baby. You don't have to." was watching the children with those cold, dark eyes. Their educational progress is acceptable for human standards, I suppose, though human standards are notably low. Their children, said. His voice was still polite but could hear the edge underneath. They're doing great for their ages. Age is irrelevant. Potential is what matters, and potential is determined by genetics. Glanced at. When you chose to reproduce with a full human, you knew the risks. The dilution of any superior traits you may have acquired through our training was inevitable. Gripped her chopsticks so hard her knuckles turned white. My children are not diluted. I did not say they were worthless. I said their potential is limited. There is a difference. Set down his utensils. Maybe we should change the subject. It's Christmas Eve. Let's talk about something happy. Why don't you tell your grandparents about the school play you were in? Looked up nervously. I was an angel. I had wings made of paper and I sang a song. Tilted his head. What is the purpose of pretending to be a mythological creature? Is this a form of psychological conditioning? It's just fun, said quietly. Fun is not a purpose. It is an absence of purpose. His eyes filled with tears. She looked down at her plate and said nothing more. Wanted to scream. She wanted to flip the table and throw the nutrition blocks at her parents' perfect silver faces, but she held herself together. For the children. For the hope that maybe, just maybe, things would get better. They finished dinner in near silence, made small talk about his job as a terraforming engineer, listened without interest, continued to make notes on his device, recording observations about the apartment, the food, the children. After dinner, they moved to the living room. The Christmas tree glowed in the corner, its lights blinking red and green. Presents were piled underneath, wrapped in colorful paper with bows and ribbons. Some were for some were for, and two special ones, wrapped in silver paper, were for and. Walked slowly to the tree. She picked up the silver packages and carried them to her grandparents. These are for you, she said softly. I made them myself. She handed the first package to. This is a star. I painted it blue because Mama said your planet has blue stars. She handed the second package to. This is a figure of our family. See, that's you and Grandmother and Mama and Papa and me, and we're all holding hands. She stepped back and waited, her small hands clasped in front of her. Unwrapped her gift slowly. She held up the painted paper star. Glitter fell onto her silver robes. She looked at it for a long moment, then set it aside on the arm of the chair. Handmade objects are inefficient, she said. Manufacturing produces superior results with less waste of time and resources. Unwrapped his gift. He examined the clay figure, a lumpy, crooked thing with stick arms and dot eyes. It was clearly made by a child's hands. It was clearly made with love. He set it down next to Star. The proportions are inaccurate, he said. The limbs are asymmetrical, and you have included yourself and your brother in a group that should logically only contain genetic or legal family members. You are our family, whispered. You're our grandparents. Made a sound that might have been a sigh. The adoption of was a research arrangement. It does not extend to her offspring. You share no genetic material with us. You share no legal bond. You are, by standards, strangers. Stood up, his hands were clenched into fists. That's enough. Tugged on his mother's sleeve. His voice was small and confused. Mama, didn't grandmother and grandfather bring presents for us? The room went very quiet. Looked at the little boy. Her expression did not change. Her voice did not warm. We do not gift resources to those of uncertain value, she said. Your genetic contribution is diluted. Your potential is limited. You have not proven yourselves exceptional in any measurable way. Perhaps when you achieve something of note, we will reconsider. Until then, you are unworthy of investment. His lower lip trembled. He did not fully understand the words, but he understood the meaning. He understood that his grandmother was saying he was not good enough. Understood perfectly. Her face crumpled. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She ran from the room, her sobs echoing down the hallway. HFY called after her. He turned to, his face red with anger. How dare you? How dare you say that to a child? She's 8 years old. She made you a gift with her own hands. And you? His voice cut through the room like a blade. He stopped and looked at her. She was sitting very still. Her face was pale. Her eyes were fixed on her adoptive parents, but there was something in her expression that had never seen before. It was not sadness. It was not anger. It was ice. Take the children to their room, she said quietly. I need to speak with my parents, alone. Hesitated. Please. He nodded slowly. He picked up, who wrapped his arms around his father's neck and buried his face in his shoulder. He walked down the hallway to his room, leaving alone with the 2 silver figures who had raised her. The Christmas lights blinked on and off. The snow continued to fall outside. And began to speak. The living room was silent except for the soft hum of the Christmas tree lights. Sat across from her adoptive parents, her hands folded in her lap. She looked at them, really looked at them, for the first time in years. They were beautiful, they were powerful, they were everything the galaxy considered perfect. And they had just called her children worthless. Shifted slightly in her chair. We should return to the soon. This visit has lasted long enough. You are not leaving, said. Raised an eyebrow. We are not. Not until I say what I need to say. His eyes narrowed. Your emotional state is compromised. This is why humans are considered unstable. You are allowing your feelings to override your logic. Take a moment to compose yourself, and then we can discuss. I am composed. Stood up, she did not shout. She did not cry. She spoke in a language that made both freeze in their seats. She spoke in high. Not the common dialect that traders and diplomats used, not the version taught to adopted children. She spoke in the ancient, formal tongue, the language of courts and councils, of declarations and challenges. It was a language she had been told she would never master, a language her parents had said was too complex for a human brain, but had studied in secret. For 30 years she had studied. She had found old recordings. She had translated ancient texts. She had practiced in her dreams. And now, finally, she was ready to use it. I invoke the right of speaking, she said, her pronunciation perfect, her tone formal. By the laws of the Dominion, you must hear my words until I am finished. You may not leave. You may not interrupt. You may not dismiss me. Silver face went pale. You know the high tongue. I know many things you never taught me. I learned them despite you, not because of you. Leaned forward, his scientific curiosity suddenly awakened. Fascinating. Your neural pathways should not have the capacity to. I said you may not interrupt. He closed his mouth. Began to pace. Her voice was steady, but her words carried the weight of decades. When I was 4 years old, I won my first academic competition. I solved mathematical equations that adults struggled with. I ran to you, Mother. I was so excited. Do you remember what you said? Said nothing. You said, acceptable, you may continue. 4 years old, and I had already learned that your approval was something I had to earn, that your love, if you even called it that, was conditional. She stopped packing and faced them directly. When I was 12, I broke my leg during combat training. The bone was shattered. I was in terrible pain, but I did not cry because I knew you would call tears a weakness. The medical unit fixed my leg and I was back in training the next day. You never asked if I was scared. You never held my hand. You never told me it would be okay. Pain is a biological signal, said automatically. Comforting a child teaches them to rely on external validation rather than. I told you not to interrupt. He fell silent again. When I was 18, I asked you why you adopted me. Do you remember your answer, Father? You said I was selected because my genetic profile showed potential for enhanced cognitive function. You said I was an experiment, a test subject. You wanted to see if a human could be raised to standards. His voice cracked just slightly, but she kept going. I spent my whole childhood trying to be good enough for you. I studied until my eyes burned. I trained until my muscles screamed. I pushed down every feeling, every emotion, every human instinct because I thought that was what I needed to do to earn your love. But it was never enough. Nothing was ever enough. She pointed at the handmade star and the clay figure, still sitting abandoned on the chair. My daughter made those for you. She is 8 years old. She spent 3 weeks working on that star. She kept it hidden in her room so it would be a surprise. She talked about you constantly, how she couldn't wait to meet her grandmother, how she wanted to show you her school and her friends and her favorite places in the city. She loved you before she even knew you. His eyes burned with unshed tears, but she did not let them fall. And you looked at her gift, this gift made with love, made with hope, made with everything a child's heart could offer, and you called it inefficient. Shifted uncomfortably, I was simply stating a fact. You were cruel, there is a difference. Walked to the window and looked out at the falling snow. The city lights blurred through the glass. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter but no less powerful. When I came to Earth, I did not expect to feel anything. You raised me to believe that emotions were weaknesses, that attachment was inefficient, that love was just a chemical reaction in primitive brains. But then I held for the first time. I watched take his first steps. She turned to face them. And I learned something you never taught me, something you are incapable of understanding. She walked back to stand directly in front of. Love is not earned. It is given freely, without conditions, without measurements, without genetic tests and potential assessments. You love someone not because they are exceptional, but because they exist, because they are yours. His face was unreadable. That is not logical. No, it is not, and that is what makes it powerful. Took a deep breath. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the moment she had dreamed about for years, the moment she had feared she would never have the courage to reach. I invoked the right of severance. The words hung in the air like thunder. His eyes went wide, actually gasped, a sound had never heard her make before. You cannot, said. That right is ancient, it is irreversible. If you speak the words of severance, the adoption bond will be dissolved. Legally, socially, permanently, you will no longer be our child. You will no longer carry our name. You will be free. Spoke the words in high. The ancient, formal phrases that had been used for thousands of years by who needed to break bonds that had become chains. I, once called daughter of house, do hereby sever all bonds of adoption, all claims of kinship, all ties of obligation. I reject the name you gave me. I reject the standards you imposed on me. I reject the cold, measuring, conditional love you called duty. Her voice rose. I am not your experiment. I am not your subject. I am not your legacy. I am a human woman. I am a wife and a mother. I am warm and emotional and wonderfully, beautifully illogical. And I am done trying to be worthy of people who never deserved me. She walked to the door and opened it. My children are not deluded. They are more than you will ever understand. They are kind. They are creative. They are full of love and joy and hope. They are everything the fear and everything the universe needs. She pointed out the door into the snowy night. Now leave. You are no longer welcome in my home. You are no longer part of my family. You are no longer my parents. Stood slowly. Her face was still unreadable, but her hands were shaking slightly. You will regret this. When news of this reaches the Dominion, you will be humiliated. No other house will. I do not care about houses. I do not care about your Dominion. I care about my children. I care about my husband. I care about the life I have built here on this beautiful, messy, emotional world. She met eyes one final time. Goodbye, goodbye. I hope someday you learn what you missed, but I will not be the one to teach you. The two walked past her without another word. They stepped into the snow, and the shimmer transport activated around them. In a flash of light, they were gone. Close the door. Then she slid to the floor, put her face in her hands, and finally let the tears come, found sitting on the floor by the front door. Her face was wet with tears, but she was smiling, a strange, broken, relieved smile. He sat down next to her and wrapped his arms around her without saying a word. They stayed like that for a long time, while the snow fell outside and the Christmas lights blinked quietly in the living room. "Are they gone?" he finally asked. "Yes." "Forever?" "Yes." He kissed the top of her head. "I'm proud of you. I should have done it years ago. You did it when you were ready. That's all that matters." They sat together until the cold from the floor started to seep through their clothes, then helped to her feet, and they walked down the hallway to check on the children. And were in room. They had built a fort out of blankets and pillows in the corner, and they were huddled together inside it, their faces illuminated by a small flashlight. When they saw their parents, they scrambled out and ran to them. "Mama, are you okay?" asked. Her eyes were red from crying, but she was trying to be brave. Knelt down and hugged both children tightly. "I'm okay, baby. I'm more than okay." "Did grandmother and grandfather leave?" "Yes, they had to go back to their planet." Pressed his face against his mother's shoulder. "Are they coming back?" Took a deep breath. This was the hard part. How do you explain to a child that the people who should have loved them chose not to? How do you teach them that rejection is not their fault? "No, sweetheart, they're not coming back." "Is it because of me?" asked quietly. "Because my star wasn't good enough?" Felt her heart crack open. She pulled back and held face in her hands, making sure her daughter could see her eyes. "Listen to me. Your star was beautiful. Your clay family was beautiful. You are beautiful. You are perfect exactly as you are. Do you understand?" Slip trembled, but grandmother said, "Some people don't know how to love the right way," said. "It's not because you're not enough. It's because they are missing something inside, something important. They look at the world and only see numbers and measurements and tests. They can't see the things that really matter." "What things?" asked. Smiled and touched his nose. "Kindness, creativity, the way you laugh when Papa tickles you, the way sings in the shower when she thinks no one is listening." "I don't sing in the shower," protested, her face turning red. "You definitely do," said, grinning. "It's usually that song from the cartoon about the space princess." Covered her face with her hands, embarrassed but smiling, giggled. And just like that, the heaviness in the room began to lift. "Now," said, standing up, "it's very late and tomorrow is Christmas. You two need to sleep so can come." "Is not real," said, with the confident wisdom of an 8-year-old. "Papa told me last year." Put his hand over his heart. "Traitor, I asked you to keep that secret." "You should not have trusted an 8-year-old with sensitive information," said, crossing her arms. Laughed, really laughed for the first time all night. "Okay, even if it's not real, presents are still real, and you can't open them if you're too tired to wake up. So bed, both of you." The children complained and dragged their feet, but eventually they were tucked in, and kissed them good night and closed the door. Then they got to work. They stayed up until 3 in the morning. They wrapped extra presents, toys and books and games that they had been saving. They built a pillow fort around the Christmas tree. They made hot chocolate and put cookies on a plate. They found old photos and made a simple album called Our Family with pictures of every happy moment they could find. When they finally collapsed on the couch, looked at with tired but happy eyes. "You know this won't fix everything," he said softly. "They'll remember what happened." "I know, but I want them to also remember this. I want them to know that when things fell apart, we put them back together. That love is what you do after the hard parts." kissed her. You are an incredible mother. I learned from the opposite example. They fell asleep on the couch, tangled together, while the snow continued to fall. Christmas morning was magical, and woke up to find the living room transformed. The pillow fort, the presents, the cookies with bites taken out to prove had visited even if he wasn't real. The photo album sitting on top of the biggest box, wrapped in bright red paper. They opened presents for hours. They ate pancakes shaped like Christmas trees. They played with their new toys and read their new books. And when found the photo album and looked through it, she started crying, but they were happy tears. "This is us," she said, touching a photo of the four of them at the beach last summer. "This is our family." "That's right," said, "this is our family and it's perfect." Later that day, after the children were busy with their toys, checked her personal communication device for the first time since the night before. She expected messages from the Dominion, formal notifications of her severance, maybe cold accusations or threats. What she found was something else. There were dozens of messages, not from officials. They were from other humans, other people who had been adopted by families, people she had never met but who had heard about what she did. "I heard you invoked the right of severance. I didn't know we could do that. I didn't know we had that right. Thank you for showing me. My mother told me I was defective because I cried at my wedding. I've felt ashamed ever since. Your story made me realize I have nothing to be ashamed of. I have a brother who was adopted by a house. He's been struggling for years. I sent him your story. He called me today for the first time in 5 years. He was crying. He said he wants to come home." Read the messages with tears streaming down her face. She had thought she was alone. She had thought she was the only one who felt this way. But there were others, so many others, who had been raised in the cold, who had been told they were not enough, who had been starving for warmth. And now they were reaching out, connecting, finding each other. Looked over her shoulder. "What is it?" "I think I started something," said. I think there are people who need to know what I know, about love, about family, about being enough." He put his arm around her. "So what are you going to do?" Looked at the messages. She looked at her children playing happily in the next room. She looked at the Christmas tree, still standing proudly with its messy handmade ornaments. "I'm going to answer them," she said. "Every single one, and I'm going to tell them what I wish someone had told me." She started typing. "You are not defective. You are not deluded. You are not an experiment. You are human. And that is the most powerful thing in the galaxy." 1 year later, his apartment was full of people. They had pushed all the furniture against the walls. They had set up folding tables covered with food, Korean dishes, Vietnamese dishes, American dishes, and even some nutrition blocks for the few guests who preferred them. The Christmas tree stood in the corner, bigger than last year, covered in ornaments made by dozens of different hands. Now 9 years old, was running through the crowd with 3 other children she had never met before this year, but now called her cousins. Now 6, was showing off his new drawing tablet to a shy teenager named who had been adopted by a family on a distant colony and had never held a piece of Earth technology before. Was in the kitchen, trying to explain the concept of Christmas cookies to a confused scientist named who kept asking why humans would consume decorative food items. "You just eat them," said, handing her a cookie shaped like a reindeer, "because they taste good. But the aesthetic function is destroyed once consumed. Is this not wasteful? Try it and find out." Hesitated, then took a small bite. Her large, dark eyes widened. "This is acceptable," she said slowly. Grinned. "That's the holiday spirit." Stood by the window, watching the snow fall over Seoul. It had been exactly 1 year since she had told her adoptive parents to leave. 1 year since she had invoked the right of severance. 1 year since she had changed everything. In the months after that Christmas, had answered every message she received. She had connected with other adopted humans, sharing her story, listening to theirs. Some were still living with their families, afraid to leave. Some had already left but felt lost and alone. Some were mixed, humans who had been raised by and then returned to human families, never quite fitting in anywhere. Had created a network, not an organization, not a movement, just a simple connection of people who understood each other. They called it the homecoming circle. The Dominion had not been pleased. News of severance had spread quickly through their systems. A human had rejected a commanding matriarch. A human had used the high tongue. A human had invoked an ancient right that most modern had forgotten existed. The embarrassment was significant, and had released a formal statement saying had been mentally unstable, and that her rejection of their house was a symptom of human emotional weakness. They had hoped this would end the discussion. Instead, it made things worse. Other adopted humans began to speak out. They shared their stories on galactic networks. They questioned the practice of adopting children for research purposes. They asked why love was considered a weakness and why worth was measured only in genetic potential and test scores. And slowly, quietly, some began to listen. Not all of them, not even most of them. They had been cold for thousands of years, and change does not happen quickly in ancient civilizations. But a few, especially younger who had grown up with human siblings, started to wonder if maybe their way was not the only way. Was one of them. She had an adopted human brother named who had struggled his whole life with expectations. After hearing about Story, had reached out to ask if she could learn more about human ways of bonding. She had traveled to Earth specifically to observe this Christmas gathering. Now she was eating cookies and looking around the crowded apartment with something that might have been wonder. "I do not understand," she said too. "These people are not related. Many of them have never met before. Why do they act as if they are family?" "Because they chose to be," said. "That's what family means to humans. It's not about blood or genetics. It's about who you hold close." Was quiet for a long moment. "We have no word for this in. Maybe you should invent one." The evening continued. People ate and laughed and shared stories. Some cried as they talked about the families they had lost and the new families they had found. And the other children put on a small show, singing holiday songs and dancing badly but joyfully. Read a poem he had written about his favorite foods, which was not related to Christmas at all but received enthusiastic applause anyway. As the night grew late and guests began to leave, gathered everyone in the living room for one final moment. "1 year ago," she said, "I stood in this room and told people I loved that they were no longer welcome in my life. It was the hardest thing I ever did, and the best thing." She looked around at the faces watching her. Humans and adults and children, people who had been strangers a year ago and were now something more. "I spent my whole childhood believing I was not enough, that I had to earn love, that I was defective because I felt things. But I was wrong. Feeling things is not a weakness. It is the greatest strength humans have." Came to stand next to her mother and took her hand, wrapped himself around her leg, put his arm around her shoulders. "We are messy," continued. "We are emotional. We make art that falls apart and food that disappears and gifts that are imperfect. We cry at movies and laugh at nothing and love people who do not always love us back. And that is beautiful. That is what makes us human." She raised her glass of cider. "To chosen family, to love without conditions, to the stubborn, illogical, wonderful persistence of human hearts." Everyone raised their glasses, even who was still holding half a cookie in her other hand. "To being human," someone called out. "To being enough," someone else added. "To Christmas," shouted because he was 6 and Christmas meant presents. Everyone laughed and drank. Later that night, after the last guests had gone and the children were asleep, sat in the quiet living room with her communication device. She had one new message. It was not from anyone in the homecoming circle. It was not from a news network or an official. It was from a young she had never heard of, writing from a research station in a distant star system. "I read of what you did," the message said. "I do not know you, but I know your story. I have a human sibling. She is 12 years old. Our parents say she is not progressing at acceptable levels. They say she may need to be returned to Earth or assigned to a less prestigious house. I do not want her to go. I do not understand why I do not want her to go. My parents say it is inefficient to form attachments to research subjects. But when I see her cry, something hurts inside me. I do not know what it is called. You said love is given freely, without conditions. Can you teach me how to do this? Can you teach me how to keep my sister? Please. I do not want to be cold anymore." Read the message 3 times. Then she smiled, wiped a tear from her cheek, and began to type a response. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. The clouds were parting, and through the gaps the stars were visible, thousands of them, distant and cold, scattered across the endless black. But here in this small apartment on this small planet there was warmth, there was light, there was love. And in the vast, cold calculation of the universe, they had always believed efficiency was everything. They had mapped every star, measured every planet, every resource. They had built an empire based on logic and reason and the careful management of genetic potential. But they had never accounted for one variable. They had never understood one force: the sheer, stubborn, illogical persistence of human love. And that, as it turned out, was the most powerful thing in the galaxy.